In 1998, a little video game called Half-Life came out, revolutionizing video game storytelling. Shortly after, we got World Peace. It held for almost a decade until Half-Life 2 Episode 2 came out in 2007, but then it all fell apart after every Half-Life project in production at the time got cancelled, and even the release of Half-Life Alyx couldn't fix that. Fuck! Anyway, let's talk about Half-Life storytelling, and Portals 2, since they are set in the same universe. People tend to focus on how you are constantly stuck in the perspective of your character, but I got nothing to say about that, so fuck it, let's talk about something else. Half-Life's and Portal's timeline is pretty fucking tight. Despite how many games there are and the fact that we don't know the exact year any of them take place in, we know exactly what happens in what order. And yes, Half-Life 2 and its episodes have added some retcons, but it still feels like one singular narrative that has been going on without a hitch. Well, besides 13 goddamn years of radio silence until a fucking VR spin-off. But how does the story feel so connected while still being ever so vast and expansive? Well, because there are actual connections, dumbass. Let me explain this by showing how the seemingly completely separate games make reference that let the world of Half-Life and Portal feel real. Or at least I thought about doing that until I realized the fact that the fanbase is literally doing it in their projects too, so technically I don't even have anything to talk about! Okay, so for this video, I'll talk about the stories of a fuck ton of games and explain how they connect, but due to the sheer amount of stories present, I cannot break all of them down. I recommend that you are at least somewhat familiar with the stories of the official games so that you can follow along without a problem. You can find more than enough summaries on YouTube, and trust me, it's more than worth it. So if it ever feels like I'm skipping over somewhat important details, that's on purpose. This is not the story of Half-Life and Portal told poorly, and yes, I am making that a series. This is an observation on how Valve ties its stories into each other and how the fans don't just understand how that works, but then also apply it to their own stories set in the same universe. For that, I'm going to split this whole business into 5 parts. The Half-Life 1 saga, the Half-Life 2 saga, the Canceled Saga, the Portal Saga, and finally, the Fandom Saga. Let's begin where everything else began. Half-Life 1 is the story of the resonance cascade shown through Gordon Freeman's eyes as he kills the invading aliens from Xen and sees his colleagues, whether scientist or security guard, die. It is further explored in the 3 official Gearbox expansions. Opposing Force starring Adrian Shepard and AGCU Marine. Blue Shift starring Barney Calhoun, the security guard that got locked out in the beginning of the game. And last and kinda least, The K starring Gina Cross and Colette Green, 2 scientists of which the former is a hologram in Gordon's and Barney's tutorial. And before any of you wish to say that the expansions aren't canon, you can either watch Theoretical Rain's video on Opposing Force's canonicity, as it also applies to the other campaigns, refer to Mark Laidlaw's take on canon in this conversation a Redditor had with him, or just kiss my ass. Anyway, these were 4 campaigns that all showed us a different perspective on the same events. And yeah, Blue Shift and Decay mostly just take place in the first half of Half-Life, while Opposing Force mostly takes place in the second half, but the events still manage to tie into each other as they all revolve around the Black Mesa incident. Now let's talk about those tie-ins. And I'm not just talking about the obvious ones of Shepard seeing Gordon jump into Xen, or Gordon and Barney seeing each other during their commute to work. That's the more basic, simple stuff. No, I'm talking about the more hidden story connections. Let's start with Shepard's and Gordon's campaigns. You'd think they clash immediately with the Wraith X invasion, but since that mostly happens after Gordon leaves Earth, it's realistic that he might not have come across the one specimen that appeared beforehand. Also, this is less related to Half-Life 1 and more so to 2, but to nuke an opposing force gives us a great excuse to leave behind Black Mesa, because it's fucking destroyed. Plain, simple, does its job. But besides not conflicting with the main game, this expansion also fleshes out the Black Ops by turning them from yet another faceless enemy faction to yet another facet of this insane conspiracy. Half-Life lets us know that humanity has continuously experimented with Xen for its own game and that humanity knew what it was doing. The military even kills all witnesses and tries to cover it up, but Opposing Force in turn lets us know just how deep all this goes. Even soldiers that were meant to help in the cover-up are then also killed when they become a potential threat. Blue Shift meanwhile helps in explaining what exactly happened at the beginning of Half-Life. Well, it gave it a name. Yeah, remember how Gordon was teleported around and then fell unconscious? That's called a harmonic reflux and can potentially be infinite. I guess there's also stuff like seeing Gina Cross carrying around a crystal sample, or Gordon Freeman walking towards the HEV suit room on some screens at the start of the campaign, or later on hearing someone mention Shepard and seeing the unconscious Gordon dragged around. But that's about it. The story is just too short to have all that many references, especially since it ends before opposing force properly begins. Decay, despite only ever releasing as a side mode on the fucking PS2 release, actually has some of the most interesting instances of all this. The crystal sample used for the resonance cascade for one, we both see how Gina Cross and Colette Green bring it over to the test chamber, and how some aliens then later steal it. Speaking of Green and Cross, remember how in the HEV suit room, 2 of the 3 suits were already taken? Well, these 2 women are the ones who took them. It's even closely connecting itself to fucking Blue Shift because Rosenberg, a character from that expansion, comes back as a character in this story. He's even the reason we know Green's and Cross's harmonic reflux is around the same time Barney goes for Zen. They're the reason the military has been called here, they're the reason the Zen invaders are more aggressive in the second half of Gordon's campaign because they tried to stop the resonance cascade. That's one hell of a track record. Now, you see how there are certain mini-arcs that the expansions, well, expand upon. The HECU, the Black Ops, the fucking Zen aliens, the Crystal Sample, Dr. Rosenberg, fuck, even the HEV suits. The Black Mesa incident is a dense fucking story with tons of moving parts and it flows so beautifully. By the way, there's this really cool video by Nixiner that shows all 4 of these campaigns side by side, letting us see how they work together. Seriously, this is how this interconnected story structure started. And this is also how it will continue. Speaking of continuing,
rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. Not that I wish to imply you have been sleeping on the job. No one is more deserving of a rest, and all the effort in the world would have gone to waste until... well, let's just say your hour has come again. The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world. So wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ashes.
instead of one event seen from multiple eyes, Half-Life 2 is a continuous story all about Gordon that we see in multiple parts and sadly never got finished. All we have are Half-Life 2, Half-Life 2 Episode 1 and Half-Life 2 Episode 2, meaning we failed to reach number 3 twice in a row, and I doubt there will be a third attempt at it. Half-Life 2 Episode 2 Part 2 running on Source 2 in 2024? Probably not, no. Anyway, let's check out the new connections made. This time, less so between the games I just mentioned, because as I said before, they're one continuous story, and instead more between the Half-Life 2 saga and the Half-Life 1 saga. Once again, we have insanely minor characters expanded into proper main characters, just like Barney and Gina were expanded in Blue Shift and Decay. Eli Vance and Isaac Kleiner, who are apparently these two generic scientists, are the most obvious example. There's also Breen, who was previously never mentioned by name, as although the Administrator is occasionally mentioned in Half-Life 1 and the expansions, Breen specifically isn't. That's part of why some people actually thought that the G-Man was the Administrator. Magnuson is also part of that, originally being some random scientist whose casserole you ruined on your way to the HEV room. Small story beats like the satellite Gordon shot into space or the Vortigons being enslaved by the Nihilith become more relevant than they've ever been before, as they now lead to ways to fight the Combine. You might think that Half-Life 2 is mostly disconnected from 1 simply because the surface story, which is the Combine invasion, seems like it has nothing to do with the Black Mesa incident, but these connections show how they tie into each other. Hell, the Black Mesa incident is the entire reason the Earth even has the Combine's attention. Now, to finish up the official side of Half-Life, let's talk about everything after Episode 2. Since the next games are a lot more disconnected, I'll talk about them individually first. Lost Coast is a small level cut from Half-Life 2, but still released separately in which nothing relevant to this video happens. Richter Overtime made a fantastic video about it in case you're interested. Half-Life 2 Episode 3 is a cancelled Half-Life game that presumably had Gordon and Alex travel through the Arctic to find the Borealis, but any and all specifics are unclear as, well, the project was cancelled. Moving on. Okay, no, I'm just fucking with you. August 25th, 2017, the former lead writer of Half-Life, Mark Laidlaw, released a script called Epistle 3. Quickly enough, people figured out that that was his idea for the story of Episode 3. And while it's not official since he isn't the lead writer anymore and only returned for consultation on Half-Life Alyx, it's still worth discussing as this was his vision. We'll talk about the details later, but know that it basically ends in the G-Man taking Alex away and Gordon giving up hope as he sees the Combine's might, but Vortigern save him and either bring him into the far future or back to the start of Half-Life 1. And I think it's ending a shit that would have definitely ruined Half-Life, especially with the time loop idea, but that's besides the point. Now, Episode 3 isn't the only episode meant to come out after Episode 2. We don't have a leaked script for the rest, but at least a vague idea of Episode 4. Well, both versions of it. Let me explain. Episode 4 was the name 2 different projects went by. The first one was worked on by Junction Point and its founder, Warren Spector. In case you don't know who that is, that's okay. He's only really known for making the small, unknown indie game called, Deus Ex. Now, we don't know much about the story here, except that it was supposed to be about Ravenholm and set before Half-Life 2, probably depicting how it became the zombie-infested hellhole it is now. That all was then scrapped because Disney bought the studio and forced it to work on Epic Mickey instead. Ironically enough, this isn't even the first time this happened to the studio Spector worked for, because Eidos, the fucking publishers of Deus Ex, were bought multiple times, ending up in the hands of fucking Square Enix. I can't put it better than H-Bomber Guy, so I'll just steal his clip.
Square Enix said they were going to leave Eidos to themselves, then changed their mind and forcibly merged the company with their European branch, and oh my god, isn't the game industry so normal and fine?
Hey, wait a sec. Square Enix and Disney? The new Kingdom Hearts is looking great, guys! Anyway, another project like the Junction Point one, sometimes called Return to Ravenholm or just Ravenholm, was then worked on by Arcane Studios. It was meant to star Adrian Shepard again and be set between Half-Life 2 and Episode 2. Shepard would wake up in Ravenholm, meet Father Grigori, and then fight new fucking zombie types. This time the head crabs don't attach to the head, they just bite their victims and infect them, like a regular zombie. It then turns out that Grigori is also infected, guess that's what happens when you stay in Ravenholm, mutates at the end, and likely has to be fought. The reason this one didn't happen is the same reason we got no Episode 3, just a dumbass executive decision from Valve. Like 8 or 9 chapters were finished and Arcane still keeps them on their hard drive. So yeah, there's a never seen before official Half-Life episode that still exists on an internal hard drive that was somehow never leaked. You gotta respect that. And about Episode 5, well, nothing is known about it except that Spector worked on it. Over to Alex. Or rather not, because it has its completely own story that I don't feel like covering here. The timeline fuckery is just not worth it right now. Maybe someday. But one thing I will mention is that at one point you can see a female scientist's shadow talking to someone. That scientist is theorized by some to be Colette Green. And that's it for canon and official Half-Life games. You see how things are once again brought back up. Not only do Shepard and Green have the potential of coming back, but now the connections reach beyond just Half-Life 1. Ravenholm got expanded into a whole game and Portal's Aperture Science has a bigger presence than in Episode 2. At the same time, we also see the struggle between Kleiner and Eli of that game repeated in Epistle 3, this time by Mossman and Alex. The world, which has converged in Half-Life 2 in order to bring it all together, is once again diverging. And while it's nowhere near to the same degree we had a story scattered during the Black Mesa incident, it's still great to see this already living world just become more grand again. Or, well, it would have been if Valve would finally get that stick out of its ass and make a game without needing some completely new technology like VR or the Steam Deck to make into a gimmick as though they're Wii U era Nintendo. But I'll save that rant for another time. For now, we'll do what we just did for Half-Life, but for Portal. Or, as you can also call it if you're a fucking lunatic, Half-Life Gaiden. There's 3 major Portal stories, Portal 1, Portal 2, and 2's co-op mode. The latter was meant to feature Shell with another human test subject called Mel, but the team decided to go with the robots Atlas and Peabody instead. Okay, you might wonder why the fuck I'm talking about Portal at all, at least in this video, so I think I'll have to quickly explain that. Now, it's no secret that Portal and Half-Life take place in the same universe, especially with the very clear-cut references to Aperture in Episode 2 and Black Mesa in both Portal games. Well, Portal still does this connection thing Half-Life does. Hell, it also expanded minor characters into playable ones the way the Half-Life 1 expansions did, but it does it slightly differently. Half-Life was always about the story, Portal not so much. I'm not saying it was irrelevant, but it was closer to a Monty Python skit than the epic that Half-Life was. And no, the Lab Rat comic doesn't really change that in my eyes. Portal 2, however, started the same way but went apeshit in the second half, taking concepts like the personality cores or the companion cube from the first game and stuff like Cave Johnson's ramblings or the co-op bots from this very game, then making them a lot more relevant towards the end. Basically, it builds its story out of concepts that were likely taken as throwaway gags at first. Now, let's be real for a second. Both franchises being connected isn't too important to either one of them. The most you can get out of it is that the outside world of Portal is ruined by the multiple alien invasions that happen in Half-Life, making Shell's escape from Aperture Science more a death sentence than actual freedom, but that's just fan interpretation. The games themselves do not delve into it at all beyond GLaDOS and Wheatley saying that they have no clue what the outside world looks like. However, this goes to show that Half-Life isn't the only franchise Valve does this connection business for. You might even say the following: Valve technically does the same with TF2's story in the comics, so how is this special? Valve isn't the only company that does this, how are they special? This is just telling a story, well, isn't it? Well, listen here, fuckos, this is special because the community joins in on it. Mark Laidlaw himself has a very lax stance on canon, allowing anything to happen in this world as long as a fan is willing to add something of their own. Speaking of the fan projects, let's talk about them. As with the official games, we'll start with Half-Life and then go to Portal, although I'll be a bit more detailed about the individual titles. Project Borealis is a completely original fan game made in Unreal Engine that's meant to be Episode 3 while basing its story on Epistle 3, but it's unclear if any changes have been or will be made to it. It's basically just a website and some social media accounts right now, but there's apparently a sizable team behind it. After a long period of silence, the game was thought to be as dead as the official Episode 3, but a new teaser was posted a while back on August 25th, 2022, revitalizing the community's hope. Through the City, meanwhile, is basically what Episode 4 could have been. Right now, only a demo with the first chapter is out, but we have a mostly spoiler-free story summary on the mod's ModDB page. Adrian Shepard makes his comeback in City 17, finally released off the G-Man's stasis. A citizen called Ryan Brown plans to escape with him, but they need to get to the Citadel's control room for that. They later try to activate the train to escape and find Rocky, a Race X survivor, potentially even the very last one. They invade a Combine fortress outside of the city, and anything beyond that is unknown. And although as far as we know Ravenholm will not be a part of this mod, it is confirmed that there will be an infected part of the city that gives off similar vibes. Black Mesa is not actually a new story, but instead a Half-Life 1 remake and retelling. The story is basically the same, but retcons from Half-Life 2 are added, plus a bit from the expansions. Kleiner and Eli are met right before the Resonance cascaded after, maybe even Lamar too. Breen is occasionally referenced as the administrator, although he himself was not seen. You also see the Half-Life 2 Barney specifically knocking at the door he's locked out of, plus a reference to him later. And Shepard actually comes into the room when Gordon is about to enter the Zen portal. He's even a functioning NPC that walks around and shoots you. This allows for the fan remakes of Blue Shift and Opposing Force, both of which are actually in development, to work in synergy with Black Mesa. However, Magnuson is seemingly absent. The casserole you ruined now belongs to some random security guard. This doesn't directly contradict Episode 2, as the casserole incident Magnuson mentioned could have been before Half-Life 1, but it's very clear that the implication was that that, in fact, was him. It's unlucky, but what can you do? Now this next one's fucking juicy. Like the expansions, Echoes takes place during Half-Life 1, but brings in storylines from up until Episode 2. An unknown character, only referred to as Candidate 12, enters Black Mesa to get to work, but ends up having to fight for their life due to the Resonance Cascade while the G-Man watches from afar. They encounter visions from the Combine, which is seemingly trying to flee from the G-Man while the HECU and the Zen aliens fight each other, leaving 12 in the middle of it all. The game ends with them getting transported to the Black Mesa staff dormitories, witnessing the G-Man save a young Alex Vance and getting abandoned by him. They die due to the nuclear explosion from Opposing Force, and their file gets closed. Portal Prelude is, if you check the title carefully, and I mean really carefully, no, even more carefully, study it properly, every single pixel. I want a full fucking 60-page report on this, a prelude to Portal. Shocking, I know. Abby, another test subject, wakes up in the relaxation vault and then gets greeted by Mike, the enrichment center overseer. She goes through the test chambers, and once she's done, a party is supposed to be held for her, but gets delayed for the activation of GLaDOS. The problem is that, as she said in her first boss fight, there's no morality core installed and she kills most of the present employees. Mike shuts the system down, but the auxiliary power would eventually be activated, so Abby has to rush to get that morality core and install it on GLaDOS. Once she's back, GLaDOS is already active and floods the facility with neurotoxin, but Abby still succeeds in installing the core during a fight that leaves her unconscious. In her last moments of being awake, she sees a scientist trying to reason with the computer but getting killed. An Aperture Science employee manages to drag her out of the facility, but she ends up having to walk through a parking lot while it rains, collapses due to blood loss, and presumably dies while the G-Man watches. After playing around with space, it's now also time to play with, well, time. That way, Reloaded takes place both before and after Portal 1. An unknown test subject gets the time travel portal gun, allowing him to jump forwards and backwards in a 20-year interval, basically making it a portal between the present and the future. It's also revealed that only this specific time jump works, everything else would either not function at all or kill the subject. As the future enrichment center is destroyed, the test overseer admits that it is that way due to a rogue test subject, aka Shell, and that the tests are actually meant to train the player for killing her. At the end, the subject is supposed to go back into a stasis chamber, but there's two possible endings. One, they comply, are told that they will change the course of history and likely cause the events of Portal 2 never happen. Two, they escape through an elevator, the portal gun deactivates, and they encounter some headcrabs outside. Thinking with Time Machine takes place right after Portal 2's ending, as a crow flies into the quote-unquote sky, destroying the screens that built the illusion. Shell reawakens in an underground portion of the facility with new, more futuristic test chambers. She also discovers the titular Time Machine. She eventually finds an unsolvable test, but pressing a button makes a hologram of the fucking Borealis break open the walls. After investigating said walls, she finds the co-op bot saying that they shut down GLaDOS and will keep tabs on Shell and her Time Machine. GLaDOS, however, tells her to travel back in time, and the chamber exit finally opens. After all the tests, Shell enters the room, puts a portal gun and the Time Machine away, and gets thrown back into Portal 2's ending, confusing the hell out of past GLaDOS. In Aperture Tag, this unknown test subject uses a new paint gun that shoots gels rather than the typical portal gun. While they go through their own tests, they meet a new personality core called Nigel. He makes them deactivate the facility's old energy supply, as a new one has been built by now. During the final test, the subject accidentally breaks into a maintenance area of the enrichment center and realizes it's the Emergency Intelligence Incinerator's control room, which was meant to kill them after the test. So naturally, they deactivate that shit. Once the incinerator fails to kill them, Nigel is supposedly actually happy that they didn't have to die and lets them leave because of how similar they are to Shell and the fact that GLaDOS doesn't want to get killed again. Outside, they realize that it's just another fake simulation. Last but not least, Portal Stories Mel. Now, this story starts all the way back in 1952 with the German Olympian Mel. Hey, wait a minute! Yes, the creators of this mod did, in fact, repurpose the scrapped co-op character Mel and brought her back as the main character. Anyway, Cave Johnson's pre-recorded messages guide her to a stasis chamber which she is supposed to test for up to a few hours, but things go wrong and she's instead in stasis for a few decades. Someone impersonating Johnson guides her to the portal gun, but later admits that he's a maintenance core called Virgil and makes a deal with Mel. He helps her escape the facility in exchange for her putting him back on his management rail. It's later explained that GLaDOS being destroyed in Portal 1 apparently made the control systems fail, which explains why Aperture Science is in its current, ruined state. However, the reserve power made the prototype security system called Aegis activate. It considers them threats to the, dead scientists, so it hunts them down and even starts flooding the facility, but Mel and Virgil luckily survive that. They successfully hide from Aegis in an overgrown test chamber and even make their way over to its central core and disable it. Mel then enters Aegis and inputs a code to shut it down, but then finds out that it tried to flood the facility specifically to destroy GLaDOS' remains, as she is still a problem. Virgil decides to just get Mel out and deal with GLaDOS himself, so they activate the exit elevator by giving away the portal gun and says goodbye to him. After the credits, we see Aegis use its last bit of power for a final failsafe. It drains everything it still has to wake up Shell, setting up Portal 2. Now, this may be all the fan-made stories I'm covering in this video, but not all the ones that exist. Hell, there's still many upcoming ones. Not just stuff I mentioned like Project Borealis and Fruita City, but also more Portal mods like Destroyed Aperture or Portal Revolution with an infinite amount of possibilities going forward. Portal and Half-Life may not have gotten any new mainline games in the past however many years, and that doesn't seem to be changing anytime soon. But that doesn't have to hold us back, as the community can still keep these franchises alive, and there's many ways to do it. Straight up continuing the main story itself like in Project Borealis or Time Machine, expanding on small details like GLaDOS' backstory in Portal Prelude, bridging the gaps between games like Fruita City, Mel, or Reloaded, or just straight up telling completely original stories that still fit into the universe like Aperture Tag or Half-Life Echoes. This all is just a long way of me saying that no matter what, no matter how much time passes without either Half-Life 3 or Portal 3 happening, they don't have to in order for us to keep going. Valve has such a loyal community that even after a decade of silence, these franchises are kept alive by their fanbase. Of course, it's not just these two specifically. #SaveTF2 shows that. But I want to emphasize the story part here. Let's take Adrian Shepard for example. He's a character that, at most, has only been mentioned a few times ever since 1999. He's been in stasis and a questionable state of canonicity for over 2 decades by now. But still, Fruita City brings him back and continues the story. Truth be told, me discovering that mod specifically is what convinced me to make this video. Just seeing how much people care about the story of these games is inspiring, you know? And I think that's the word that deserves more emphasis here. This video is ultimately just meant to show how much people care about all this, both creators and fans. The fact that bigger plot points like the satellite going shot into space or small details like the optional casserole event do not just get forgotten shows that. They come back up so that people who played the previous games can appreciate the cohesive universe more. However, when something couldn't come back up, like basically everything Opposing Force introduced, the fans can pick up the slack themselves and create something like Fruita City. Whether it's Shepard or Race X, they're never truly left behind. Who knows, maybe there's a Portal mod that shows us the adventures of whatever interesting test subject GLaDOS discovered in the vault. Hey, maybe it could be Abby from Prelude. The sky's the limit, really. Side note, part of why you can so easily explore these stories deeper is their vagueness. Leadhead made a fantastic video discussing what exactly happened in 1, and it literally started with the line, "Half-Life 1 is a very vague game." The fun of these stories is to speculate about the details and seeing what explanations might be given in the future. And if there isn't a direct explanation, you can always just make up your own and it can still fit, allowing for who knows how much fandom interaction when it comes to your story. So, when you care about a story and are inspired by it, let your creativity run free and don't be afraid to wear your inspiration on your sleeves. Your story doesn't even need to be part of the Half-Life/Portal universe, you know? As long as you show the same care for your story, you'll also inspire your fans to write something of their own. This is the lesson I think we should all learn from this. If you care about your story, so will your fans. That way, you will ensure that that story will be remembered even after decades have passed. Back in 1998, Valve created a universe that is beloved to this day, and yet there's people like me who didn't discover it for themselves until very recently. There are definitely some people out there right now who would love these games but might never get to play them because they just seem like ancient series that will never truly come back. And sure, maybe a few will come in through the companion collection or similar re-releases, but I believe that the community and its love for these franchises is what truly gets people interested. Be it a fan mod, a video series, or just a piece of fan art. The community will keep the franchises and the care put into them alive. And I think that's beautiful. Hey you, thanks for watching. It's been a good long while since I last made a proper video, almost a year already, so I'm glad to just get back into it. I've been on and off working on this video since around October 2022. I've reworked it quite a bit since then, the old version was very bloated, but you can find it in the description if you really want to. Just, you know, to know what not to do when you're making a YouTube video. Cheers!